What would be your apocalypse watch, John? Now, moving on to the big bit of announcement.
But you wanted a watch that was super rugged and reliable. Limited production.
Next big topic, G-Shock. So, but he actually had the Seiko on his in-theater time, and then he'd have the Rolex on the time back home.
Now, how many? I don't know. Be under 100 probably.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. The faster it beats, back and forth wheel inside a watch.
Let's say we're living in a post-apocalyptic world. Somebody is offering up a Rolex as a bartering. John and I last met in person at the P Company Trilogy event with First In Events, where we did the lion's share of the route together.
Yeah, it was a really good day. Absolutely awesome.
Yeah. Enjoying some
and stuff. No, it's been absolutely mega in every single way.
Definitely. You're obviously back in New Zealand now. And interestingly, I then did a video about Apocalypse Watch, which is here for those people who missed it. I got lots of engagement, lots of viewer engagement. And it sort of made me think that there's obviously among my audience, or perhaps even a new audience that's interested in that. So I wanted to delve deeper into that. And then you reached out to me, showed me a picture of lots of cool watches, and it turns out you are a massive watch enthusiast.
Yeah.
Actually, more than that, you actually make watches yourself or assemble them. We're going to find out a lot more about exactly how you do that. But before we get into that, just harking back to the last video about the Apocalypse Watch, what would be your Apocalypse Watch, John?
That's a really good question. Now, the watch I would wear, an Apocalypse watch, it would be a Citizen Ray Mears. And what that is, it's a Citizen analog watch with an eco drive movement. So you've got the solar cell, the battery, and it's all kind of encapsulated in a titanium kind of case, and is, tough. So it's kind of pretty robust, and I think it's got a mineral crystal glass, and it's waterproof to a couple of 100 meters and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like a field watch type thing, really. If that sort of falls into that kind of genre, I suppose. So I've got one, which I bought as a non-runner and repaired. But it's an awesome watch. Very lightweight, and you don't really know you're wearing it, sort of thing, and pretty tough. And
so how is it powered?
So I think they call it Citizen call it Eco Drive. Most of the main have got a similar idea. So what you've basically got is you've got a battery, which is, like I say, it's a quartz movement, and then it uses a solar cell to charge that battery, or that sort of accumulator, or whatever you want to call it, and then it just basically runs. And as long as the capacitor or the accumulator or the battery, whichever the right phrase is good nick, it'll keep running. So they tend to run for a battery life of 10-15 years, something like that, I guess. And it's also got quite clever stuff. If it's not been exposed to sunlight, it'll power down and then kind of remembers the time, and then powers back up again, stops the hands and stuff like that. So quite a lot of cool functionality to it. But that
is very cool. So it stops the hands, and then it obviously resets it once it wakes up, so to speak.
Yeah. So it kind of like, I guess it just ticks away in the background, but the hands stop. And then when it kind of gets some light back on it, and it obviously gets a certain amount of light and a certain voltage, it kicks the hands back into life, and away it goes. It's also got really, really good lume as well. So in the dark, it tends to glow, like a sort of Russian nuclear reactor. Quite a hefty glow on it, so you can read it quite easily at night. So that's a lume compound, and that's like photoluminescent. So it absorbs light, and then basically, emits that light back out, I suppose. Then you've got watches, I guess, like the sort of Luminox stuff, which uses tritium, little tritium vials, and that's like a radioactive material, and it kind of emits, sort of stuff like that. You got much older watches with radium, but most of those these days would be sort of completely depleted. They won't really glow anymore. And then you've got things like backlights and stuff like that. So like Lume Bright and all those kind of ideas that that luminous paint, or however you want to call it, that degrades over time. So you'll find, if you get like an old 1980s Seiko dive watch, it's likely that the luminescence on that is kind of pretty much depleted. It will glow, but maybe not for very long or very brightly. So
So with old Rolexes, when they get it serviced, do they reapply the Lume, or do people actually appreciate the?
So with Rolex, that's a really interesting question. So Rolex I've got a Rolex here. It's not mine. It's in for service. But and I'm not a Rolex authorized agent or service person. So I talk from limited experience, but maybe a little bit of sort of knowledge. What Rolex tend to do when a watch goes in for service, they sometimes replace the entire dial assembly. So you get on a watch what's known as a service dial. So the watch goes in and gets serviced, and they'll just replace the dial potentially. So that's why older Rolexes, like GMT Masters from the 70s and things like that, if it still has the original dial, its value is increased because it still has that dial. So and then what tends to happen with those is that the Lume tends to patina up. There's a big word in the watch kind of world of patina, which is like something that looks old and looks worn. And on those particular watches, that sort of Lume goes like a caramel color. It's a very attractive look for those that know that sort of thing. So
sort of creamy beige. Yeah, I definitely know what you mean. Yeah.
As well as it did, but it certainly looks like nice, and it's kind of like you kind of know that the watch dial is potentially the original one with the watch, or certainly it's an older dial by having that type of look to it, I guess.
So really when someone has a watch service, it's worth, or someone would actually say, and I don't actually want you to replace the dial in this case, right? Like I could imagine
I am actually not sure what so if you take if you've got a Rolex and you go into the authorized dealer's service network, I'm not actually sure what Rolex's policy would be. You may be able to
whether you can actually ask.
Don't service the dial, but equally they may go, that's just policy, and you get a new dial. So
yeah. In which case, you're better off going to a sort of an independent service agent. Obviously, mindful it wouldn't be. It wouldn't then be.
If you've got a highly expensive Rolex and you've got the warranty and all that stuff, you may want to go down that authorized dealer route as opposed to an independent type of person. But you pay your money, you take your choice, I suppose.
Right, next big topic, G-Shock. So for those who have seen my previous video, I sort of was very quick to dismiss G-Shock. I'd say the story behind that is probably because personally I just haven't got a lot of emotional connection to them. I've never owned one. I'll put my hand up and admit that. I know people who have. I've certainly known people in my acquaintances of mine who, I know George, who's been on the channel a couple of times, he's had a G-Shock that he took on multiple deployments, and he showed it me once, and there was clearly a very strong connection. It just never clicked with me, so perhaps I was a bit quick to dismiss them, because I got some very helpful comments about people talking about that. For instance, it's a bit of fun talking about an apocalypse watch, that there certainly are, as part of their offering, G-Shocks that would really be suitable. Now, it's a bit different for you because I understand you don't mind G-Shocks at all. I really like them. It'd be really interesting to learn a bit more about them.
Sure. Okay, well, I really like them, but there's a caveat to that, right? So G-Shock as a brand covers a wide amount of different sort of styles of watch. And I think for me, and then this might be massively oversimplifying it, they fall broadly into the two sort of categories. You've got a fashion category. So, and there's a lot of Casio G-Shock models that are kind of down a fashion route. They're all still G-Shocks, and they're all super robust and, fulfill all those G-Shock sort of trait, robustness, waterproofness, long battery life, etc. And then there's more of a sort of, what the phrase would be, tool watch, sort of, practical kind of G-Shock, which will be a watch you buy, for everyday kind of use and, sort of military use maybe.
Yeah.
And certainly there are four G-Shocks that have a NATO stock number or an NSN or national stock number. So they're actually, they're issued. You could, if you're in that sort of military world, and you can get that watch issued under that NSN. So I like that ladder sort of watch. And you sort of mentioned the Apocalypse watch earlier, and I think my second choice would be, it's a 5610U. Which is a G-Shock square model. Again, it's solar, so it's got a solar-powered battery, and it's got heaps and heaps of functions. It's probably all the watch you'd ever need, and from a timekeeping perspective, and it's got all those G-Shock traits. So I really like that one. and I had a little project to try and get hold of all of the NSN issued ones, and I've kind of done that apart from one, and I'm still trying to get hold of a 6600. So that's an older watch now, and it's kind of a little bit out of sort of date and out of production, more or less. I think they've got a special edition out, but I just wanted a standard one. So one will pop up somewhere, and I'll probably hit. We've got a thing here in New Zealand called Trade Me. It's like eBay, so similar idea. So yeah, one will pop up there, and
I think the idea with them is, for those who, like me, aren't as familiar yet with G-Shock, they're not only sort of waterproof, they really spend a lot of time making them shock-proof and sort of dirt and sand-proof, right? I think that must be the casing that is... So a particular, So
when Casio developed it, and I forget, there's a famous Japanese engineer, and I forget his name, so we could probably pop that in a link or something, maybe. And he famously dropped a regular sort of watch, and it broke, and he was pretty trying to say, well, I wanted to make a more robust and sort of, hard-wearing watch. So he went off and he sort of developed G-Shock. So they've got waterproofness, they've got shock resistance, they've got like a heavy-duty case, so you can drop it, bang it around, get it full of mud, take it swimming, take it diving, within the confines of whatever depth you go to, and it sort of sucks all that up and comes back for more. So they are famously tough. They've been around for a long time, since the early to mid 80s, and sold a lot of watches, and still going strong.
In terms of adding to the previous video, probably a bit quick to dismiss them. There certainly would be models that would be absolutely suitable for Apocalypse. Now let's turn back to your own watchmaking. What's inspired you to take that up? Because it's not your full-time job, right? It's a hobby, if you want to call it. So
right, okay, so by profession, I'm a mechanical engineer, so I like all things that kind of row and go and tick and tock and all those things, right? So that's just me, and I've always had a kind of inkling and a love of taking things apart and putting things back together, whether it be cars, bikes, watches, camping kit, you name it. It's kind of been modified and sewn up and taken apart, but I probably had a crack at doing that. So, and as in the previous role, when I was living in the UK, I used to travel overseas quite a bit. So I used to go up into Asia a fair lot, and of course you're passing through airports and you're doing whatever. Invariably I would purchase a watch, nothing too expensive, and then come back. Anyway, so I had done that, and I had this particular watch that was very much like not sort of much an heirloom, but sort of sentimental value, if you like. And I took it here to get repaired. It was broken or wasn't working. And I took it in for repair, and went to the watch store, and they were not dismissive. They happily took it. I wanted to repair it, and then they came and said, "Oh, it's broken. Here's a big bill." And the bill was for the watchmaker to do the job was more than the watch was worth. So I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to financial suicide or a bad choice. So I took it back, and I thought, I wonder if I can have a go. So I took it apart, and it was as simple as battery contacts needed cleaning, which is a little disappointing, but anyway, it got running, and it's running and ticking away. And from there, I thought, well, I would like to maybe have a go at restoring a watch to start with. So I bought myself I think it was a Seiko Divers or something like that, probably an SKX. Which people out there will know what an SKX is.
They're lovely.
It's a very well-known Seiko dive model, and very highly modifiable, and lots of parts out there, and runs I think a 7S26 movement, and it's pretty standard sort of stuff. So I thought, well, I'd get one of those, and have a go at one of those, and restored it up. And then I had another go, another one, and before you know it, you kind of work your way through. And watches, in terms of the mechanical side of it, I find it pretty straightforward. The size of everything is tiny, so that's there. You're in there, and you've got like magnification and very specialist tools to work on them. So you got into that, and of course then you kind of inevitably join an internet group or a Facebook group or something like that. And I've done all those things, and you get chatting or whatever, and then started to sell a few things, and I was trying to work my way towards buying a higher end watch. So I was classic, buy one for $1, end up selling one for 10,000, over sort of like however many steps, and that's kind of a goal. But I think along came tabbing and Paris 10 and a very few other things, and getting fit for all of that, and that's kind of somewhat gone out of the window, really. So
there's a healthy balance there somewhere.
Well, there's a balance, right? You can sit at a work desk all day, and then you kind of sitting at a watchmaking desk all evening. It's probably not the best for your health. Anyway, so over that period of time, I've repaired lots of stuff, and then it kind of becomes a hobby, and then it also is a hobby with a bit of a spin-off benefit, in as much as people are always looking to get things repaired and fixed, and maybe don't want to go down a more traditional sort of watchmaker or authorized dealer or whatever type route, and they're happy for me to kind of have a look at so I get a lot of like things that come in, and I have a look at them and appraise them and go, well, I can fix that or not. So that's kind of how it started. So it's very much a little business of sorts, on the side, and it kind of ticks along and does okay, and it kind of keeps me out of mischief, and I can pick it up and put it down when I want. That's just quite nice, really, as a hobby goes.
Brilliant. You mentioned the Seiko SKX. I'll tell you a famous one, as many famous wearers, General Schwarzkopf, and there's a couple of pictures of him. People can Google it. I'll put one up. He always had a Seiko diver, and then on his left wrist he had a Rolex President, or so he had some sort of precious metal Rolex. But he actually had the Seiko on his in-theater time, and then he'd have the Rolex on the time back home. And it's just a habit that he picked up at some point. Obviously, there's lots of other ways where you can keep track of 2 time zones, but the quickest way is, because obviously a guy like that, he wore it throughout the Gulf War. He would be speaking to, President Bush, or people in the US as the commander of all the armed forces. And then obviously it's important to keep track of the time in theater. But the Seiko would never leave his wrist. Yeah, brilliant. I absolutely love the Seiko, and it's an iconic design. And what I like is it's its own thing, right? It's not trying to be anything else. It doesn't actually look like, say, an Omega diver or a Rolex diver. It's real. It's become its own iconic design. And I think that's pretty cool from Seiko, where they have, if you look for it, they've got some models that absolutely emulate other models. I mean, every brand's got its own version of a Submariner, I always think.
Yeah, pretty much.
But actually, alongside that, Seiko does have iconic designs that are truly its own. In fact, if anything, which have been emulated by other brands, I think. Yeah, the whole sort of turtle dive case, I think, or the sort of pillow-shaped dive case. I'm not going to say they were the first ones, but they have certainly made it iconic. I think they're one of the brands that I think really came out with that sort of that pillow, turtle shape, whatever you wanna call it.
Yeah.
In terms of your own watch collection, right? Like, is it something that's always in flux? Are there some pieces you've sort of always had, or in fact, do you have a watch collection, and sort of how many watches should we think about?
So, okay, the way I rationalise it in my mind is, so there are definitely watches that I've got that I own outright, and I probably wouldn't sell, or they are mine. And then there's everything else that I would call loosely stock, but depending on, what time of day it is and how I'm feeling about that particular thing, and, how much effort I put into it, that kind of comes and goes. So some of them are a little hard to say goodbye to. But yeah, so there are a lot of watches here. I have a lot. And now how many? I don't know. It'd be under 100 probably.
Okay, that's good.
But a lot of those are, as I was saying, they're sort of stock and come in. And I tend to really focus on watches that I like. So, like if you've got a hobby, and I personally, I'm not a dress watch person, right? I'm not at all interested in those. I think they've got their place and they're really great. And if that's you do you. It's awesome. But it's not for me. I'm definitely much more the field watch, the dive watch, that sort of like more ruggedized type thing. So that's what I like. So that's what I tend to play around with and have. So my personal watch collection isn't huge, actually. I suppose it's probably maybe there's 7 or 8, maybe 10. I don't actually have the number off the top of my head. And there's nothing in there super expensive, really. There are a few Seikos. I've got some Citizen models, so yeah, pretty standard. I've got an older Omega Seamaster 600, so that's kind of like the 60s sports watch. So it's kind of dressy, but sporty at the same time, I suppose, or was certainly in the 60s. And that's nice. So it's manual wound, and it's got the gold, all the good stuff on it. And what else? And of course, G-Shocks.
Sounds amazing.
And a few of those. Yeah, so, a few different things and of stuff of interest, really. there's a lot of older. I tend to like older Seiko stuff and older Citizen stuff. So things like, if people know what a Citizen Aqualand is, that's a specific type of dive watch, or an early dive computer almost. I kind of got one of those. Seiko King Turtle, you mentioned turtles, so that's
beautiful.
I love very much, and I've had a few of those. And then
is that as comfortable as people say? Because I've never owned one, but they say it's quite comfortable, that sort of pillow shape, or that turtle shape.
A piece of watch though, you've got a bit of real estate on that wrist.
Yeah.
And it's a big lump of metal. Not as big as some, but yeah, you definitely know you've got it. Wow, it is a comfortable watch. I mean, like things like when you put a jacket on, or you got sleeves on, or waterproof coat or stuff like that. It doesn't catch you. You don't really notice it kind of hitting that at all. And so it's quite good in that regard. And it hasn't worn. I mean, I've worn it quite a bit, and it's still looking pretty good, really. So it was
pristine.
It was a gift to me. So I bought for a birthday, a milestone birthday, I think. Yeah, it's still holding up. So it gets worn a lot. I wouldn't say I wear it every day, although I have probably worn it for the last 3 months, pretty much non-stop, really. So that's unusual. I tend to swap things around and they're in rotation, but that's been worn quite a bit. So yeah, kind of cool. So there are a lot of other things here. I've got an Arnie, so people might know what a Seiko Arnie is. It's the new one. So famously Arnold Schwarzenegger.
It's black, right?
Yeah. So he famously wore and I forget the model number now, a watch. I think it's in Commando.
I'll put it up.
Commando, and he's got the rocket launcher.
I can see it in my mind's eye. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
But he's got that watch. So anyway, so Seiko re-released it. I don't know, 5-6 years ago, and I've got the re-release version. I don't have the original. Surprisingly enough, command really, really big money these days. It's an analog and digital mixed movement, so it's kind of obviously not a mechanical movement at all. So that's my one concession to film watches. I think I've got one of those. And then,
there is a famous one from Alien, isn't there? I mean, it's a complete sidestep because we were talking about your collection. There is a famous, is it a Seiko? I think it might be, yeah. There is a famous one from Alien, isn't there, who Sigourney Weaver wears. It was designed specifically as a futuristic prop, but I think it was then released to the general public.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
I'll look it up. No, it's interesting, but sorry, I've interrupted you.
No. I mean, there's lots of like that whole Hollywood watch thing. I mean, there's like loads of different watches that have come up. You know, all those ones that are in there. There's like I think there's a Casio in one of the Bond movies. Maybe it's Octopussy, maybe, and he's got it on the wrist. And that watch now is super collectible and very well highly sought after. They all pretty much are. If it's been in a movie, they all tend to become somewhat collectible. Older Seikos are as well. So things like, you talked about Turtle, the Willard, which of course is, again, that's got a movie connection. It's worn by Captain Willard in Apocalypse Now. So hence it's got the...
I referenced it in the video. Yeah.
So that's a super popular. What the original? I think so. Seiko re-released it, but the original ones are worth a lot of money. Many thousands of dollars here in New Zealand. What else? Yeah. So they're all nice to have, and they're all kind of highly serviceable. So you can really get in there and you can really work on them. And get them looking nice. And most of the parts are available. When you get into 80s stuff, and it was relatively limited run, and it's analog digital, then that becomes a little harder to work on, depending on what it is and who made it. But most of those older mechanical automatic Seikos are highly repairable and good to work on and scrub up nicely when you've worked on them, for sure.
Is it, for the more modern ones, is it still the case, and does it differ by brand? If we just focus on mechanical watches, whether you have a Seiko or, say, a Rolex or an Omega, and maybe a Casio, like, is there a difference in how serviceable they are? And then also looking at the past, whether is a Seiko nowadays less serviceable, easy to service than one from, say, the 70s or 60s?
Right. Okay. So lots of questions there. Okay. So
sorry. Yeah.
No. Okay. So let's take the last one then. So is a Seiko from a modern day Seiko as easy to service as an older one? So what's happened is over the course of Seiko's watchmaking run, in my opinion, is that the movements have become more mass produced, right? So like an old Willard that movement in there, while it was entirely, of course, it was a mass-produced movement, it is not as machine manufactured as the latest one. And Seiko have taken cost out as well, so good Japanese engineers are looking to refine and to drive cost out of the movement. So that's what they've done. So what that means is that I wouldn't exactly say the movements, in my view, are disposable today, because I think they're not. They absolutely are serviceable, but they are less artisan, less polished, less, they're there to do a job and do that job exceptionally well. Okay, so that's that Seiko question answered. In terms of a Swiss movement versus, say, a Seiko or a Citizen Miyota type movement, having worked on some Swiss movements, not thousands, but enough, I'd say that certainly the older ones and even the more newer ones are designed to be serviced. There's little things like, without going into huge amounts of detail on, watch terminology for parts, but like when you want to take a certain, like a plate off of the movement, maybe to get to the wheel, the wheel train inside or whatever. On a Swiss movement, often there's like a little notch or cutout where for your screwdriver tip to go in, or a piece of pegwood or whatever, and just to pry that plate up and out of the way. And often on a Seiko, that doesn't have that, because maybe their view is it doesn't get serviced as often, or if at all. Whereas on a Swiss movement, I think they're encouraging people to go along and get the watch looked after, so they make it somewhat easier for the service person. And then the finish inside, a Seiko is, works perfectly well, but it's there to do a job, and it's not necessarily beautiful. The Grand Seiko is a different thing. So we're talking about regular Seiko watches.
Yeah. Grand Seiko start at thousands and thousands of pounds.
Sort of Seiko sort of take on a Rolex or a high-end sort of watch, really. Whereas on like a sort of Swiss movement, certainly like an Omega or, certainly on a Rolex, it's beautifully finished inside. Rolex are, famous for like sort of lots of sort of swirl marks and stuff like that, and pelage, and obviously Omega do a lot of sort of like copper plated on their movements and things like that. So they just look beautiful. You take them apart and they just look really good. And that's like a Swiss watchmaking tradition. It goes back, not hundreds of years, but certainly decades back, So you look at like an ETA movement, for example, on an older 1950s Swiss watch, and they are absolutely lovely to look at as well. Something like even like a sort of Hafis, which is a watch brand that's kind of sort of gone out almost out of existence really today. I've worked in a few of those, and various other things as well, and they're just absolutely lovely inside to look at. A real joy to work on. You think of the pressure if you're in the watch sales game, and you're talking more mainstream watches. Obviously what Rolex and those high-end guys do, they're very much got a market, and the market's not necessarily mainstream, right? But if you're a Seiko or Citizen or whoever, you're trying to appeal to a much broader, more mainstream market. Well, that market, in terms of timekeeping on personal level, you've got the whole wrist computer thing, Apple Watch, all that stuff. You've got mobile phones competing for that space as well. So for people to go out and actually invest and spend money on a watch, for timekeeping, when they can go and buy a device that will connect to their phone, give them emails, they can listen to music on it, all that stuff, it's very, very different. So it's understandable that the market must be shrinking, I guess, over time. It just must be.
I've given a mechanical watch to my son, an old Seiko Sports 5 series, an affordable way, and he absolutely loves. And whenever I see him posting pictures of it, I can see that it's there. So he's building that relationship with the watch, hopefully, because I noticed, when it's got nothing to do with me, and I just see a picture of him, and I go, look, he's wearing it, and so he's obviously become, and that's the way I used to be when I was a boy. It was a Swatch when I was his age, a Swatch. At the time, I was able to afford myself, but it was multiple months of pocket money, and I had a job on the side. But I think that's where it starts, isn't it? When you're young and you start developing a relationship. In fact, my very first watch, and this goes against what I said earlier about not liking G-Shock. It was a Casio. It was that, I don't even know the model name. Very classic. So we're talking very early 80s now, probably 1980 around that. And it was that classic digital Casio. And they cost next to nothing. I got it from my dad, and it had a stopwatch on it. And also, at that age, you use it all the time. You're constantly doing races. And I remember probably daily, you were timing something just because you could. And I loved it. But then I moved to Swatch, which was obviously, that's pretty was it called them quartz? They're quartz, aren't they? They're quartz.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can't remember now. But the other day I saw, and it was a retro issue. Funnily enough, I saw the exact, and I hadn't thought about that watch for decades, but I saw the actual design, the actual Swatch I had. It had a little shield. I can probably find online, I'll put it up, but it was a really emotional shock through the system, because I hadn't actually looked at that for decades, but then when I had it, I would wear it every day. But I think that's where it starts. I think when young people, and it's nothing to do with timekeeping. It is to do with timekeeping, but you develop that emotional connection. But we're digressing, and there will be a really exciting announcement right by the end of this podcast. But what I wanted to get into a little bit more first is somebody watching who's maybe wanting to get into watch assembly, watchmaking, watch modding. There's different terms I think bandied about. For somebody who knows nothing about it but is interested, if you were to make a watch from scratch, could you talk us through parts that you're actually working with, sourcing them?
So watch modding then is what you're doing there is you're buying complete parts, and complete watch movement, so mechanical watch mod, right? So classic would be you'd go and buy yourself what is often called a Seiko NH35, which is the classic sort of mechanical movement, right? So you need a movement, which is basically the thing that does all the what makes the watch tick. It's got all the components in. So, and you pick a movement, and then you pick a case for the watch. So that's obviously the thing that you look at. You're talking about the turtle earlier on. The actual stainless steel or whatever case that that movement's going to go in, and that's got a crystal or a glass or a watch glass, whatever you want to call it. Depending on the style of watch, it might have a bezel, which is the thing you twist around, on a dive watch, which give you the minutes or the hours or whatever you want to do. You need a strap, some description. You need hands, and then you need a face. So the watch face is the thing you look at every 5 minutes when you're looking at the watch, and that all fits. Now you've got to buy all those parts, and all those parts need to fit the movement you've selected. So let's say you're going to go down a very well-trodden path of a Seiko or TMI NH35 movement, which is an automatic mechanical watch movement, and it's got a date window for date only on an NH35. You'd go and buy that. You'd go and find a case that would fit that watch, so the style you want. You'd go and find a dial that would fit that movement, and then you go and find some hands that would fit that movement, and then you put them all together and assemble them up. And it's an assembly job, and it's relatively straightforward. You need some specialist tools to do that. And so it's not just a case of depending on what sort of finish you want and how good you are and what kit you've got available to you at the time, you might be able to kind of do it, but often you need to buy some specialist sort of tools to do it. Maybe a movement holder. Certainly, we need a workspace to work on. You need some watchmaking screwdrivers and tweezers, and there's various other things you might need. And all that stuff's available. You can get it, and depends on where you want to go and how much you want to spend. Right? It's like any kind of thing, really. So that's the very basic list of things, and then you put it all together and get it working, and then away you go. And then you've got yourself a homemade modded watch, Blue Peter moment. So that's that's a movement holder, and that's a watch movement in the movement holder. It comes, you put it together, and then it entirely depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? The first one you build won't probably be the last one. You'll build more and you buy more stuff to support that, and then before you know it, you've got a space at home full of stuff, and watch tools and watch equipment and all that stuff, and away you go, and you're enthusiastic, the bugger's bitten. And it's important to note that NH35, everyone calls them a Seiko movement, and I guess it kind of is, but it's actually made by a company called TMI, which is like a sort of subsidiary, I think, of Seiko, and they make movements for the wider watch industry. So you get a lot of what you call now, micro brands or boutique sort of brands or whatever. And often they'll be running NH35, NH36, sometimes NH34, and all those are the same base movement, but they've got different features added. So it might have a date ring, It might have a day.
Yeah.
It might be a GMT movement. They're all sort of like same part of the family. And they're all closely related to the Seiko movement that's in this turtle. And then you've got a similar thing with ETA. You can buy ETA movements, and they're a Swiss brand, and they sell their own mechanical watch movements. And then there's a whole raft of up-and-coming Chinese movements, you know, which have got, you know, lots of different features and very, very high beats per minute and a whole bunch of stuff going on there. And some watches use those movements, you know, some.
And of course, for the viewer, that will give it more of a sweeping, movement is the beats a minute.
The faster it beats, back and forth wheel inside a watch, the sweep will be, you know, almost, it's smooth, really, really smooth as it goes round. You don't see any jerkiness.
Yeah.
Where,
Well, I've always wondered, and this is one thing where, going back to the sort of the tongue-in-cheek apocalypse watch scenario, let's say we're living in a post-apocalyptic world. Somebody is offering up a Rolex as a bartering tool, say to trade it for a vehicle. If you unscrew the back, would you immediately be able to tell whether it's fake or whether it's real?
Okay, so so we're in a post-apocalypse situation, but you know the watch has still got some value. I guess that's the first thing. Okay. So we take the watch apart, we'd have a look. If it was a really low-end sort of Rolex sort of homage or copy or fake, if you like, then you'd probably be able to tell instantaneously that it wasn't a thing. Mm-hmm. There are some homages / fakes out there that are very, very, very good, and you tend to pay accordingly for them. You know, you're not paying sort of your Rolex dollars, but you are paying, you know, a reasonable, pretty sum for them. And that might be, to the untrained eye, might be difficult. But I think if you've seen a lot of Rolex in series and you understand what they are, then you might be able to, you know, you'd probably be able to pick it up, what it might be.
Because there's actual jewels in them, aren't there? There are. I mean, all mechanical movements do, but I guess you can count them. You can. I once had one watch appraised, and the first thing the guy did, he said, "Do you mind if I open the case back?" She had to ask my permission, of course, and I asked him why, and he goes, "Well, that's the only way I can really definitively make a good appraisal of what I'm looking at here." And he would immediately, I mean, he looked at it for, I think, maybe 10 seconds, and he knew exactly what he was dealing with. Now, moving on to, because we talked a little bit about watch assembly, the big sort of announcement, because you and I are working on announcing, in fact, I'll let you talk about it, John.
We both have similar tastes in watches, for sure, I think, you know.
Yeah.
So we've been banging idea back and forth. So the idea would be then if you were wanting to go into the field, or you're into sort of like endurance event type thing, and you know, but you wanted a watch that was super rugged and reliable, maybe for every day, you know, you didn't want to spend an absolute fortune, and you wanted something that was fairly unique, you know, and had some sort of association with it. What we're thinking of putting together is a watch that encapsulates that limited production and run, so not hundreds and hundreds of them. And then what we're looking to do is we're looking to use a TMI movement like we talked about earlier on.
Because this is going to be hand built by John, just to be really clear, right? This is not a production line piece, I'm
going to build them here in New Zealand, and we'll put them together. So small batch production. We're going to basically have a nice engraved case. There's going to be good, decent quality lume, so it'll, you know, look the part at night. They can see what you're doing if you're out on a night nav exercise, or you're taking part in an event, or you know, you're trying to walk the dog or whatever. So it'll have some nice lume. It'll be very much in a sort of outdoor military style of watch, on a strap to be determined, but straps are, you know, obviously changeable and so on and so forth. We're going to do some nice engraving work on the back of the case. We're going to call the watch the Endurance.
That's right, the Endurance.
Working title, because obviously it endures. We're looking for obviously a quality piece of kit there that's going to last and endure. Obviously endurance has got a lot of connotations with, you know, that sort of tabbing and marching events.
The selection march, at the end of test week.
Yeah, adventure, and you know, so Shackleton's ship was called Endurance down there in the Antarctic, and obviously, you know, HMS Endurance took part in the Falklands War. So there's lots of, like, you know, connotations of endurance there, you know, and sort of in that military space. What we're going to do on the back, we're probably going to have some engraving, and we're probably going to serialize the watch with like a unique GPS location.
Grid reference, yeah.
Or a grid reference or a GPS location for somewhere in, that sort of famous Brecon Beacons area. And each watch will have its own unique identifier. So that will be kind of nice.
So I'd love to go a little bit deeper into that. But if we do them in runs of 9, if you look at the actual UKSF endurance route, that's got a start and circular route, so start and finish up pretty much the same grid. And then there's actually 8 checkpoints. I was fortunate to complete it once in a squatted effort, going again this September. So if I'm successful, which I certainly I will prepare to be, and I'm doing self-nav this time, I would have then gone to 8 checkpoints before coming back to the start point. So these limited runs of 9 would each have, and this is to what John was saying earlier, will each have their unique grid reference. So there'll be a run of 9, each with their own grid reference, which will actually correspond with either with a checkpoint of the route. If we end up doing multiple runs, depending on how much demand there is, let's say we do 2 runs, there'd be someone out there that is your sort of grid reference brother or sister who would share that grid reference with you, because every one of 9 will only have one of those unique grid references, and you could obviously go find that grid reference on a map and know where you are, just to forge that link between the iconic UKSF selection route, which is a real crucible, and anyone who has completed it, and even though I certainly haven't completed it in the UKSF environment, I did complete it in 24 hours, and anyone who will have done will tell you that these are life-changing events, and it's inspired by that and all these other connotations, as you mentioned, and ultimately just it's an endurance watch for in the field, and with a very special bezel. You want to talk a little bit about what we're thinking for bezel there, John?
So, we're not trying to sell or produce or have a dive watch, because we're not. That's not what we're doing. So what we thought was, we want to have a bezel, the thing that clicks around, and so rather than having the classic dive style with numbers on which to denote how many minutes you might have left of air or whatever that might be, we're going to basically put like a compass direction on there, so north, south, east, west, and everything else. So you can utilize that. If you're using the compass to navigate, or using a watch rather than navigate with, you can do the classic, align it with, midday or whatever. You can utilize that.
Absolutely. And as someone who, goes hiking all the time, I know bearing, we've already worked out at least 3 uses for that compass bezel, and I will show it in the ultimate video. One is indeed, as John says, once you've taken a bearing, you could quickly adjust that bezel so that you've just, assuming that sort of 20 steps later, you haven't gone wildly off, you've got an immediate idea, where's north again? And obviously, if you're unsure, you can obviously take that bearing again, but it just gives you that quick glance idea of where you're at. So that's use number 1. The second use is actually intraday timekeeping, because it's got marking. If you're taking a break, and you want to take a break for 10 minutes because you're on a certain schedule to get to the next checkpoint, you just click that forward to 10 minutes and you've got a clear marking without having to set a timer, a nice low tech for you. 10 minutes are up, or I've got 2 minutes to go, or whatever. Third one, which is not as obvious, but is very useful if you don't have any, and you're not allowed any GPS equipment on, certainly not the UKSF endurance. I'm pretty certain they won't mind you wearing a mechanical watch because you've got no GPS or anything, because you're allowed a compass anyway. It's step counting. Okay, so people may have heard about the ranger cord or putting stones in pockets, where every 100 steps, you either move a stone from one pocket to the other, or there's something called a ranger cord where you're pulling a bead, and then you're counting beads, and then every 10 times 100, you move a bigger bead, and then you sort of keeping track of your step count, which corresponds with the distance you're covering. Because if you're out in the field, you should know what distance you're covering in 100 steps, and it'll vary slightly per person. But if you're doing some serious outdoor work, that's something to be aware of. And obviously with the bezel, you could do that, where every little click is 100 steps. So it's a very easy way to do that. And then once you've traversed and you're sort of corresponding it with the map, you know the scale of the map, you know the approximate distance. With a quick look, okay, I've done this many thousand steps, that's approximately that distance. Take a look at the map. So it's a low-tech way where, certainly in an environment where, say, there's an emergency or you've got no access to GPS, you've just got your map and compass, that is definitely a useful tool for those three things. And there's probably lots of other ways. And and please mention in the comments if you've got other uses. And I read all of them, and that's how I did this podcast, inspired by lots of the comments. For instance, on the G-Shocks, that's purely because people started coming up with really interesting thoughts and ideas around that. Great. Do we want to talk about some movement that we're thinking of?
Yeah. I mean, so the movement, I think what we've said is we want to initial watch without a date function or day date function. So it's going to be nice, being simplistic.
I like that. Yeah.
Window. So that means then what we're going to use is a TMI NH38. So that's an automatic mechanical movement. TMI, as I said earlier on, a sort of subsidiary of Seiko. So good quality. So that's the plan.
That's brilliant. And then if people want, we can always think about going, because there are even higher end movements like ETA. Hey, this is the beauty about building it from scratch. People can get that. Yeah, no, cool. In terms of, I don't mind putting a ballpark out there. Are we looking at a sort of between 200 and 300 ballpark, John, in terms of cost for pound sterling, or what are we
pounds,
pricing? Right? That the end user is going to spend.
I haven't.
Is that too cheap?
So I think okay.
I think if we can do us in the 200 to 300 range, I think that'd be really good. Whereas obviously if we get the parts paid for, and then there is a bit of margin there to play with.
Right. So like when it arrives, how it's presented to the end user.
Definitely.
Get a little instruction pamphlet, right, and then you get a nice kind of box or a mesh pouch or some sort of whatever, and put it in that, so it's like practically presented. That just adds value, right, above and beyond, so you feel like you're getting something that's nice.
You're then getting a hand built watch. We are going to try and keep it below the level of many micro brands out there, because you are getting that bespoke anyway. But all that will become clear in the sort of the months ahead. There is a training tab happening at the end of February. With a bit of luck, fingers crossed, we'll have a prototype then, which I'll be wearing on the day, just so we can get some early images there, and I can obviously put it to the test and actually running through some of those uses of the bezel and things like that. Is that too optimistic, John?
No, not at all.
We were hoping to get a prototype then, don't we? Yeah.
So all the parts are ordered for prototype 01. The only thing that, the bits are ordered, they'll arrive. If I want to get the case back engraved, right? So I've got a guy that does that, because I got another sideline. I do a lot of Swiss Army knife stuff. So he's always doing scale works and stuff like that for me, so I can utilise him. And also we'll get a sense in the comments if people really are interested, to the point where we could even make a waiting list. Anyway, it's coming up to 10 p.m. where you are, so I'm going to let you go. Thanks very much, John. Unless there's anything else that you wanted to, that you think we haven't touched on. No, it's been a pleasure. It really has. It's always nice to chat watches and chew the fat and and catch up, really. So yeah, hopefully it's been useful.
It certainly has been, and really interesting.
Because obviously it fulfills a need, right? I mean, there's obviously a lot of people out there that really want to talk about it and really are passionate and enthusiastic, which is great, as we both are.
Absolutely. So thanks very much, John. And for the viewers, see you in the hill.